When you think about like the cascade of approach, the behavior is the last thing, and a strategy is responding to the behavior. But the behavior is as a result of our attitude, our expectations, and our beliefs. If you don't address the belief that you have, nothing changes.
This podcast is brought to you by the Horse Trust and Pet and Pony.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Happy Wednesday, everybody. We're back.
Happy Wednesday. So, unlike our normal podcasts, we're recording the intro after our interview today. So we thought it might be nice to open with a few reflections, I guess, on that, because we actually spend a bit of time talking about our own experiences in the interview. So I think it might be nice to kind of give you a little taste of what's to come.
Well, get your tissues ready because all I did was cry. That's my first reflection. It was quite the confronting conversation in a really good way. But I've been ill this week. I've had a cold. I've got a lot going on. Life is all a lot. And then we had this lovely conversation with wonderful Nicky, who she calls herself an empowerment coach, doesn't she?
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like there were a lot of things that she said that really like struck me between the eyeballs, like home truth. Yeah, that is where I'm at and that is hard. And so, yeah, I think people are going to get a lot from this conversation because, well, I know that you've got a lot from working with her and I got a lot of things that just were like real light bulb moments for me from that conversation. What about you, other than getting a bit emotional, because you did too?
I think the main thing for me is I'd really like people to walk away with a different view on what this kind of coaching is, because I refer to it as mindset coaching more because I can't think of a different word. It's not a great answer really, but it's like so much more than that. And I talk about this a bit in the interview, which is like, you think of mindset coaching as like, oh, I'm going to be given these 5 steps and I'm going to do them before I get on my horse and then I'm going to be better. And that's not actually what happens. You end up actually changing a lot of things. And Nicky has a wonderful way of explaining this, of like symptom versus behavior versus root cause. But I think that's the main thing for me, is like actually understanding that it can go much broader than the horses, that it can go back to things or behaviors or patterns in your way of going that you didn't realize you had. And it can just make everything feel better. Like the way I feel now versus last year or even a few months ago, it's not that I'm actively doing stuff or thinking in a certain way when I ride. I just feel different. And I think that everyone can do that. So yeah, we talk a little bit about those things and some of the fundamentals of empowerment coaching, but we also touch on our own experiences and specific common things like competition nerves and jumping height fear and stuff like that, which I think will be quite interesting for people.
Well, I already had an opportunity to put the learnings that I had into practice.
Cool.
Yeah, so yesterday I had the opportunity to take one of my horses who I got given for £1. Her name is Belle, and she was given to me for £1 because her owner didn't want her to be passed around. There wasn't any real fundamental, like big reason, particularly, other than very, very sensitive horse, has had some difficult time in her life. Like, I don't think she had a good weaning and she's difficult to load and she had never been able to take her out on her own. And there were like lots of things. And she thought, if I sell her, she's not the horse for me. She knew that. She's too sensitive, too much in a lot of ways. Not the right horse. I need to find her a home. She'd had her with us on training livery for a while and then had said to me, would you have her? And she's very talented. She's really confident to jump. And, it's a lovely opportunity for me really to have a lovely jumping horse. But she has been really hard, this horse. It has been the great unraveling, as I mentioned in the podcast with Hayley, because I tried to give her friends. She broke Zora's splint bone. She found integrating with other horses very, very hard. And that's one thing I find is when horses find it difficult to integrate with other horses, that's like a very difficult place to heal horses from, because they then, really find it difficult to kind of change on like a base level. So I've been working gradually with Belle over the last year and a half, and I've felt like sometimes we're making good progress and other times we're not. But at home, things are much, much better in a lot of ways. But taking her away from home has still been very, very hard. Anyway, so yesterday, I had a training session with my coach, Claire Gallimore, who has taught me the groundwork. So she trained with Tristan with the TRT method for many, many years, still does train with him. And I get to have the Claire's approach, I suppose, via her. So anyway, I was taking her for a lesson at my friend's amazing indoor arena, and I was really worried about it because Belle can find being on her own very difficult. And that was the perfect opportunity to work through that, because I was going somewhere different and I was going to have this opportunity to, if she was finding it really hard, to have help in that moment. And she called a bit when I first travelled her, and she called a bit when she came off the box. And then she came off the box and it was like she just kind of went, oh yeah, this is actually all right. And I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. And then I realised that I went into the arena and I had her in the rope halter, and I was in the arena, and there's something that Nicky talks about, that often the issue that we're having is because we don't want something to happen, but not because it is happening.
Yes.
And I realised that that was what I was doing. I was holding on to this, oh, I hope she isn't really anxious and finds this really difficult. And I just softened something in myself. And in that moment, Belle softened something in herself, something I could tangibly watch happen. Like her neck just changed. And I was like, huh. And now the resistance is gone. And I think so often we want so badly for something not to happen. It's like we throw a hook out and pull it towards us. Like, I don't want that to happen. It's like saying someone, don't think of a red door.
Yes.
Instantly think of a red door. And it was just amazing. And I had the best session, and it felt like it was just so at ease and so what it needed to be. And I had the help that I needed, and Belle was so like open and peaceful. And I cried after, more crying. And it was just amazing. And that was just from one tiny little grain of knowledge sharing from Nicky. And I hope that this conversation can be that for other people, because it's changed my perspective a lot. And I've not even ever had a session with Nicky, and I do think I will. I'm mildly terrified to confront the roots of my troubles, but yeah, wow. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I think one of the biggest things for me about working with her, one of my favourite questions that I now ask myself a lot, and I think probably will resonate with people, is what would it mean if that were true? So I'll give you an example. Sometimes, or actually not so much now, I used to get really nervous about going out somewhere new, doing something new, being in a new space. And I took Harley on a hunter trial for the first time ever. I've never done one. He's never done one. And I was making jokes with my friend because it was a pony club event. So we were like the oldest people there on the biggest horses. And I was like, and I just said, like, it's okay. Some people's ponies are just bigger than others and we're all on our own journeys. But I had just a moment when we were walking towards the practice arena where I felt a bit anxious. And I told myself, I was like, oh, well, you're anxious because you're worried about all the little ponies and how he's going to cope with that. And I was like, is that true? Is that actually the reason? And when I pulled on that thread a bit more, I was like, well, you're actually anxious that something will happen and maybe you'll come off that, like, worst case scenario. And I was like, okay, well, what would it mean if that were true? And I was like, well, it would be really embarrassing and everyone would look at me. It's like, what would that mean if everyone looked at you? And I'd be like, well, everyone would think that I wasn't very good. And it's like, well, what would that mean if everyone thought that you weren't very good? And, you know, when you follow this thread through, you suddenly get to a place where you're like, oh, I'm just judging my own riding and I just don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And especially, I think, because we have such a thing of like, I'm here for my horse, I'm here for the training, I just want him to have a great experience and I'm putting all my energy into that. Being able to bring it back to that and being like, that fear has nothing to do with this. So you can just let that one go. And it was, I mean, this conversation with me happened, it was there and gone in a second. And then I was just back to normal. And I was very proud of myself that day. It pushed me out of my comfort zone and I had a really nice time. But I found that to be very powerful, being able to have that conversation with myself. Because I think so many of us worry about being judged by other people and actually being judged by ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is the reality, isn't it? Often when we are, and Nicky very succinctly says this, she'll probably do much better than me, but often when we are worried about what other people think, we are actually judging ourselves and putting a like asking ourselves what other people would think of
Projecting it.
us, projecting it. Yeah. And I find it really hard to like understand that cycle, but it's a really powerful thing when we can let go of that. And when I was talking to my own therapist, I had a session yesterday, so a couple of days after the session with Nicky, and she talks about nervous system regulation. I think she's essentially like a very similar sort of mindset, you know, all about nervous system regulation, all about somatic practice, all about like being kind to ourselves and talking about our inner child and all of that kind of stuff. And the session has helped me a lot because I've been feeling very jangled again recently and having I do a lot of rumination when I feel anxious. And she helps me to really accept those parts, you know, to be like, those parts are there to protect me. They're here to help. Why are they here? What is it that they need? And I think this all ties in wonderfully. And, you know, I've done a lot of talking therapy in my time. And actually, when we can start to help our bodies, like you did in that moment, you felt that feeling and you had a conversation about that feeling and you could then let that feeling go. You know, one thing that's really sticks out for me is an emotion only lasts 90 seconds if we don't sort of tie anything to it. And that really helps me because I suffer with like anxiety attacks and it's really gross. And so having ways that you can sort of unravel in those moments, I think is so powerful. And I think you guys, our lovely listeners, are going to love and hopefully gain a lot from this conversation with Nicky as we did.
Yeah. All right. Well, without further ado, we should bring her on.
Now is a great time to thank the sponsors of our podcast, the Horse Trust. Now, we've talked about this on the podcast ourselves, but you may be aware, particularly if you're in the UK, that there is a little bit of a hay shortage this year. Yields are down by almost half in some areas, and prices have shot up. And like most of us, the Horse Trust are feeling that. They've got 130 horses to feed, including retired police horses and cavalry horses who've served our country and now live out their days in peace. They are, of course, completely publicly funded, so every donation really does help to keep their hay barns stocked this winter. If you'd like to support the Horse Trust in keeping their herd fed this winter, you can donate at horsetrust.org.uk/campaign/hay-for-horses or visit the link in our show notes. Back to the podcast.
Nicky, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
We are so grateful for you taking time out of your busy day for us because I know that you're a woman in demand because I work with you directly. And I do sort of feel like our listeners they've met you like one step removed because every time I do my intro, I talk often about, you know, what I'm doing with Harley and quite often that intertwines with the work that we've been doing together. But one of the things that I have been saying to my audience for a while now is that it's never about the horse. Really, hardly ever is about the horses. And I think people have this idea that, mindset training or mindset coaching isn't really for me because I'm not really nervous. I don't get nervous on a horse. That's actually what my friend said to me the other day. She was like, I don't need that. But actually, what I've learned in our work is it's so much more than that. So I wonder if you could give us a little introduction to you and the work that you do, and then we'll get into the meat of it.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. So I call myself an empowerment coach, and it's really interesting because I've kind of jumped around on different titles. Some people will call me a mindset coach or whatever, but the reason that I chose an empowerment coach is because I essentially help people to empower themselves to do what it is they want in their life. And when I'm talking to people like you, that might be horse related in some instances, but it can also be in work, in relationships, in life in general. So really, at the real basic level, what I do for people, and this has a huge impact for their relationship with their horse, is I help them to improve their relationship with themselves. Because the relationship that we have with ourselves forms the foundation for every other relationship that we have. So what I really help people to see is, and this is like in most people's blind spot, and it was in mine, I'm completely like my own best testimonial. Until we know ourselves and until we know what we're being driven by, life just happens by accident. And generally, it's not what we want. So I really bring that back and help people to really understand how their relationship is with themselves, often why that's the case, and we get to improve it. And when we do that, everything becomes so much easier. I really hope you're fine with going deep early, because we've just dived right in there.
100%. Miri, did you want to ask a question?
If anyone can see my face, I literally feel very seen, and I went through a few different emotions there. I went through like, oh my God, this is so cool, to like, oh my God, this is a lot, to like, okay, maybe this is going to be helpful. But I think I'll tell you a bit of background. Nicky originally reached out to, did you reach out to me as well as Rhi at the same time? I can't remember, but I was like, I'm working with somebody at the moment. It's not quite the right time for me. I think I felt like I was really going through enough deep diving into my own life because I've been going through burnout. I've been working with a somatic therapist, and so we've been, doing a lot of looking at my life basically. But just hearing you explain that in regards to the horses, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is important, and it's potentially confronting is the way I look at it, because it is. And I think horses often are, like, often horses show you a side of yourself you didn't necessarily think you wanted to or needed to look at. And I say that a lot to the people that I work with. And so, yeah, I'm really interested. How did you get into this, Nicky? Can you tell us a bit about your backstory?
Yeah, so I was the archetypal child that always wanted a pony for birthdays and Christmas. And I was at the grand old age of 30 before I got my own horse. Oh, woe is me, I didn't have a pony. And I bought the greenest, most troubled horse around. I bought at age 6. I knew 0. And she lived with me. She was put to sleep 2 years ago, age 23, I think, maybe 24. Essentially, I picked the wrong horse, but couldn't bear to part with her. And how far back do we go? So I then, having almost burnt out myself through my career, hot-footed it off to France, where I lived for 10 years. And when I was in France, I was finally able, because I'd been on the corporate merry-go-round, 2 horses on full livery, no energy to ride, no time, no motivation. I finally had the time when I was in France to really start to focus on getting myself to a space where I could ride and maybe compete, because that's what I'd always wanted to do. And I shan't give you the very long version because we'll be here till Christmas. But essentially, I got friends with somebody who became my riding coach, and she loaned me a horse. And for those of you that have done my riding masterclass, that horse is Donkey. He's now 30. He's out in the field, and he changed everything for me. But what I realized was I had the horse, I had the time, I had the ability, I had debilitating competition nerves. And inside my head, when I went to a show, and when we're talking about going to a show, I'm talking about like 75, 80 centimetres. We are not talking Olympic level. It was like Prime Minister's question time in my head. It was exhausting. And I really wanted to enjoy it. And something to say about me, if I can't do something and someone else has done it, I take that as an indication that it is possible, and I will move heaven and earth to make it possible for me, because I just wouldn't accept that I'd wanted this since I was knee-high to a grasshopper and it didn't seem to be possible. I wanted to enjoy it. So I went off on my own little journey to go, well, other people get over nerves. How do they do it? And I had what you might have heard of as tapping, EFT. I had a session online with somebody, and I do some of that myself. And I can't tell you, oh, good. I changed my world. And I was like, wow, if like a half an hour session can have me go from feeling like I'm sat in the middle of Prime Minister's question time. I literally turned up at this show, the next show that I went to, and was a bit like, wait, what? Where's the noise? Because it had been so loud in my head. Something else to know is, so my corporate background is in human resources, and I've always been fascinated by behavioural psychology. What makes people do the things that they do or don't do? Love to find out how people tick, which is why I never have any like surface level conversations. I'm like deep or nothing. I love it. And it can be quite intense, which is why you said this probably feels a bit confronting. So what I really learned through Donkey was, if you have the right attitude, which for me was, I'm going to figure this out. If you have the right coach, as in riding coach, and you have a horse that has like the patience, you can do it. And so then, because I'd always been that person where friends had always come to me for advice on things, I'm sure you guys have the same. People had always said, oh, you should have been a life coach. And it just became a calling. I'd taken a bit of time out because we were in France. I had a bit of space from consulting. And I was like, I had the capacity, and I was like, there's so many people that struggle with this stuff like I did. And then I was having so much fun with it. And it was just a case of I knew it was possible. I wanted to spread the message, and yeah, I've never stopped since.
And you, just to give people a bit of background, we can see an image behind you, but they may not see that image of you jumping cross country. But you went on to jump, was it 110s? Was that right?
Yeah, 110 and 115 show jumping.
Yeah. So going from someone who was, debilitating nerves at sort of 70, 80 to 110 is pretty impressive, and kind of putting your money where your mouth is for people who maybe feel skeptical. I wonder, could you talk a bit about the things that people come to you for, and then actually maybe how that first session goes? Because I think that I thought when we started working together that we would do some work together and you would give me kind of things for me to do. So I would, like, on the morning of a competition, I would count to 5 and turn around and tap myself on the head and, do stuff.
You mean you don't
and that
do that?
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I haven't been keeping up with my head tapping. But, I thought that's what it would be. And actually what I found is very much like what you said, which is people will say, oh, well, how are you so much more confident? And I'm like, I just am. I just feel different. But I can't tell people, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, sometimes I visualize this and I think this, but it's not like an active choice a lot of the time now. I just do feel more confident. So maybe let's talk a bit about that.
So it's really interesting because it's probably an important point where I fess up and say the way that I work is quite different to how a lot of people work. And it's because the way that I work is like an amalgamation of so many different things. I am an NLP practitioner, so I'm a master practitioner in NLP, but I've coached for 20 plus years because I coached as part of my human resources career as well. I've also done a lot of work. Like personally, I'm like the world's biggest geek around neuroscience. So I'm forever reading books that other people would be like, what? Like The Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton is literally about like how our beliefs shape our reality, the placebo effect, so many things. And I'm just such a geek. That's like my bedtime reading. So I am kind of naturally very inquisitive about like how the brain works, how we perform, how we become more resilient. I do give people strategies sometimes, but see, strategies, and this is why my work is very different to a lot of people's, strategies are like a sticking plaster. Because when you think about like the cascade of approach, the behavior is the last thing. And a strategy is responding to the behavior. But the behavior is as a result of our attitude, our expectations, and our beliefs. So the work that I do goes in at the root, which is the belief. Because if you don't address the belief that you have, Miri's given me big eyes here, nothing changes, because you have to change the root for everything else to change since. And that's why you feel very different, because we've addressed a lot of the things that you've been experiencing in terms of the behavior and the result at the belief level. But most people that do kind of confidence coaching address the symptom. They don't address the cause. No offense to them, that's just where they're at. But that's why my work is very different. In terms of how it works, fundamentally, think about like our core of ourselves. Imagine like a little fire in your chest. We're all born with that fire in our chest, and our life experiences go on top of that fire. And that, like, when they're not, we don't process emotional situations, and they don't have to be huge. We learn things. This is just completely normal in life. Maybe our sibling was more favoured than us. Maybe we weren't the cleverest at school. Maybe we weren't picked for a team. Maybe we were rejected by the first person that we fancied. Maybe we didn't have a great experience in our first job. Maybe somebody cheated on us. All these normal life things, they get put on top of our fire. And what happens is our little brains and our little nervous systems go about like strategizing, because when our fire is put out, we have a belief, which usually, when it boils down to it, I'm not good enough. It's not true, but our life experiences have us believe that. But here's what happens. Our little nervous system, because we don't want to believe that we're not good enough, we don't want to think that, because that makes us feel like shamed and awful. We go about trying to prove, she says in quotes, that we are good enough. So then we go off trying to do in the achievement world of, which was mine, I'll go as far as I can in the corporate world unconsciously until I almost burn myself out, because if I'm amazing, nobody can criticize me, then of course I'll be better than my brother, or whatever it is was one for me. But what happens is notice how I was kind of holding my chest with the fire, but pushing away with my hand. That gets us further and further away from our true self, because it's the taking the crap, to use a technical term, sorry for swearing on the podcast, taking that off away from the fire to actually release our true selves that brings us back to where we always were. We weren't born lacking confidence in the show ring. It's something we learned from our experiences, not wrong, but people are looking external for an internal issue. And what I do, which is why I say it's getting really deep with my work, we look internally and really big health warning here. This work is not for everybody, because if people only want to look at the surface, which a lot of people do, because it's scary to look under that rock, Rhi, you've had to be very vulnerable and you have been amazing. But a lot of people, they're scared to do that. And I understand why. But that's why it's very different to I'm nervous to go into the ring versus I'm now a whole and complete human and I can go and live life in a very different way.
I think the thing that I'm going through right now is I'm kind of like trying to give myself therapy at the same time as this conversation is happening.
Okay.
So, for example, I have quite a rooted fear. I had a horse really hurt me. I've never had a bad experience backing young horses, and that's a big part of what I do. And then I had this one young horse that I thought I had prepared really well, and I hadn't. And he didn't just explode. He really hurt me. I came off and then he kicked me in the back. And I still bear a scar at the base of my back. Like, to be honest, I think I'm pretty lucky that I wasn't actually really, not fatally, but, grievously injured. And I couldn't walk for a week and it was really bad. And it happened at the time of a certain point in the backing process. And even just replaying it to you, I feel sick. It's still really rooted in me.
When was it, Miri?
It was July 2 years ago. And every time when I get on a young horse and I have to do that first thing, which is leaning over and turning left, I replay it. And I have to really fight that story. And yeah, when you're talking about like, where is that root? I don't think that is the root, but I think it's like that was like something that got stuck in the root. And the root is made worse. I'm a very fearful person and I fear a lot all the time. And think that
you're all good. You're okay.
These thank you. These things, we're quite good at crying on this podcast, so don't worry.
Crying is welcome.
Yeah, exactly. Let the cortisol out. But I think that has become like it's like a crack where the fear roots its way out from, and then it becomes all sorts of other things and becomes frustration and exhaustion and all sorts of different things, and life is really complicated, right? And I think, yeah, it's just really interesting hearing you talk about like when people can actually get to the root of where things are born from, then you can actually start to change some stuff. And I feel really grateful to even just have these conversations, to know that this kind of work is there, because I know so many people who would be, myself included, greatly transformed by really understanding where things begin. And I don't know if everybody or many people really ever get to the chance to do that.
Yeah, and it's worthwhile saying, so thank you for being so vulnerable there. And as my previous career in HR, I've been trained for people to cry on me my whole life. So I'm 100% used to it. Everybody normally goes, oh God, I'm so sorry. It's like, honestly, it's great. And you don't always have to know where something came from to be able to process it, because that's where, like in therapy, which definitely isn't the work that I do, although it can, as I said to Rhi, it can feel therapeutic because we are processing things. We will, Miri, separate to this, do something to help you with that situation, because that's easy done. No problem at all. I just want to bring your attention to your language. You said, I have to fight against that story. Now, here's the thing. Ironically, what will make life easier for you, separate to what I'm going to help you with in terms of process on a different call, because it wouldn't be very interesting for your listeners, but it will be transformative for you. It's not about fighting the story. Whenever let's take anxiety as just a classic example that so many people know that they struggle with. The problem is not anxiety. The problem, in quotes, is the story that the mind makes about anxious feelings in our body. So the fighting of anything, the resisting of anything, the avoiding, the getting rid of just makes it stronger. So I use the analogy with clients of mine, they'll be nodding along if they're listening to this. Think about a little child pulling on your trouser leg. Mum, mum, mum. I'm not a mum, and I don't think you two are either, but I'm sure we can recognise the thing. Mum, 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 mum. What happens when the child gets ignored?
They get louder.
They get louder
And
and
more
they get
insistent.
more vociferous. Mum, 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 mum. To the point that like it's not possible to ignore them, right? Because they just have a full-on meltdown. The same is true with our emotions. And your nervous system, the fear, it's trying to keep you safe. It's trying to say, you've done this before and it didn't end well. And it's, of course, heightened because you will have backed hundreds of horses and been through that process and not had a problem. But the one where you had a problem and it ended and your mind is going, it could have been so much worse, which, of course, is true. And it wasn't so much worse. But notice how your mind is offering that up as a story. So our brain is designed to predict and protect. So your mind is saying, you did this before, this bit of the process, and it really hurt. So don't do that again. So it's kind of lobbing that process and that experience back into you, which is then you still feel it in your nervous system because you haven't processed it. So it's doing its job, your nervous system, but what's happening to you is you're like, but hey, that's fine, but I've got a job to do and I've got to carry on, and you're trying to push through something. So you're literally kind of like butting heads with your nervous system that's trying to keep you safe because you need to do the job. So we can make that a whole lot easier for you separately to this and process it. But your awareness is great. The key thing is notice, and I'm sure Rhi won't mind me sharing this, we've talked before about videos that people have of things that haven't gone well, like the Facebook group Shit Eventers Unite. No, don't give yourself the title of Shit Eventers. Don't watch videos of yourself falling off or people falling off or things going badly, because that is literally programming your mind. Our minds do a good enough job of programming themselves in the negative because as humans we have a negative bias to survive. Our job, coming back to our true self, is to actually become aware and intentional about, I'm having a thought process here that's making me feel quite rubbish. Let's like do some kind of critical thinking about how realistic or how likely what I'm catastrophizing about is to happen. And one of the really big things that I bring to clients' attention, you'll hear it a lot, be present, be in the moment, and it gets a bit bandied around, but it matters because here and now is the only thing we can influence. A lot of people will say to me, I'm really worried about riding tonight. And I'm like, right, but you're not even there, because they're creating a picture in their mind about what's going to happen that they don't want. So energetically, they show up to the yard in an energy where their horse is like, holy crap, what's the matter with you? But they've wound themselves up because they haven't processed something that they didn't want before. So the reason why, coming back to the fire example, processing a lot of the things that have like caused us to feel that we have to protect ourselves through life, processing those lightens the load, and then we can come to challenges from a much more spacious and with capacity place. Because the best analogy I can give you is, think of a cup. That's your capacity cup. If you're well rested and you've eaten well, you've slept well, and you've like broadly got things in balance, your cup starts empty. Then you wake up and one of your horses has broken a waterer, or I don't know, done something in its stable, and that fills something of your capacity. Then maybe you have a flat tire or something happens to an animal, and the day comes on and your cup fills up with stuff. Your capacity to deal with things is reduced because of life. But if we, as most people do, start with their capacity cup 95% full the minute they open their eyes, everything then boils over. And so it's really about removing a lot of the stuff that we're dragging around with us from our past so that we can start with an empty cup and we have way more capacity to deal with life day to day. Miri's no longer looking me in the eye.
I just gonna add a...
I just feel like maybe we should have maybe given me a little bit of warning that this wasn't going to be like, what's wrong with your life, Miriam? Here you go. Let's look. Or Nicky, have you got any time after this recording to go over stuff?
I do need to go and ride my horse, but we will put some time in.
Great boundary setting.
Well done.
I just want to add another another dimension to this, because this, I think, is the thing that really blew my mind, is actually I kind of got my head around trauma or patterns of behaviour from childhood, and I got my head around fear and fear attached to horses. What I wasn't prepared to unravel, which has been actually quite hilarious in a nice way for me, was the role of the ego and like what that means. So as an example, and I don't mind sharing this, I think this is probably quite a common thing, is hacking out alone. So I had Harley can be challenging to hack alone. He's got a lot better, but recently he's kind of found it hard again. And one part of that was replaying this horrible ride I had on him when he was 5, which is now a video in my head, but we did some work on that and it's now, you know, completely sort of faded, and it's very sort of magic brain stuff that Nicky and I walked through together. But another piece was, we were talking through this in one of our sessions. Nicky was saying, she was sort of like picking underneath it as she does. She was like, okay, she was like, you've just told me that when he's growing, he gets worse because he finds it hard in his body, and he also gets worse in the autumn. She was like, so why are you trying to do the hacking alone thing right now? And I was like, well, you know, I just think it's a quiet time and it's a good time to do it. And Nicky was like, okay, but you just told me that it's not a good time to do it. So why are you doing it now? And I was like, because if I don't fix it now, then it'll never be fixed and I'll be like this forever. And she was like, right. So actually what you're saying is that you think you need to fix him. And you, Nicky, I'm maybe paraphrasing this in a bad way, but this is how I felt it. It was like, he's not a thing to be fixed. This is not a behaviour to be fixed. What you need to change is how you react to that behaviour, and just like kind of learn to live with it and stop berating yourself for not quote unquote fixing it, because it was totally ego led. And I had a very similar thing with the hunter trial. You know, I was saying to Nicky that I was going to go around in pairs and then go around individually. And Nicky was like, why? And I was like, oh, because, you know, it'll be really good for him and we'll build his confidence and he can go out on his own again. And Nicky was like, it's quite a lot of jumping efforts to go around twice. And it's quite a lot for his brain and your, you know, brain. So why would you go around twice if it's not for his training? Because you've just acknowledged that actually maybe it's not the best thing. And then I was like, well, I guess if I only go around in pairs and I don't go around on my own, then it's not really an achievement. And Nicky was like, right. So that's another ego thing. And I just think it's so interesting when you start to hear that voice. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, so the big thing, I was smirking away at that because it's really, so my role often with people is kind of helping them to see what's in their blind spot and asking questions to bring things to people's awareness. So the whole thing about the hacking, our brains are completely contradictory, and the ego is essentially like our teenage self. It wants to be in a rush to get to the end result. So when you notice yourself rushing, like you with the hunter trial of I've got to achieve, in quotes, something this weekend, that's your ego saying that. When we actually bring that back and say, well, what do you want? Well, I want to have a good experience. And if you remember, we talked about how could you put some achievement in, because nothing wrong with wanting to achieve, but how could you do that in the pairs round? Oh, well, maybe actually I could go out in front in a couple of the jumps. I don't have to go round again when he's going to be physically tired, mentally tired, so are you, etc. And the thing about the hacking was you were worried in your mind. You were like, I think there was two things at play. There was, if I don't get this sorted now, then he's never going to hack alone ever. So that's your ego trying to predict the future, i.e. now or never, which when we go, is that actually true? How do we know about that? But it's also your ego was trying to get to a place of safety and certainty, i.e. I'll be fine when we can hack out alone. Bit of a news flash for everybody. Your mind will move the goalposts, because then you'll be able to hack out alone, and then it will be like, oh yeah, but now we need to be able to do this, because it's never satisfied. Go on, Rhi, look like you had a light bulb moment.
Yeah, that was it. Because I think for me, it wasn't that he doesn't hack alone. He does. It's just really, sometimes it's very unpleasant because he gets faster, he feels anxious, and then I have to spend a lot of mental capacity helping him feel okay, and also not necessarily being able to help him get back to a neutral. And I think what you were saying, Nicky, is you are just wanting to go from 0 to 100. You want to go out and have the certainty that nothing on that hack is going to go wrong and that he's going to feel relaxed throughout the whole thing. And that's just not reality. And you cannot control that for a horse, and you may never be able to. So the idea of trying to fix that is just not necessarily.
And can I ask you a question, Rhi, so that you can help? I don't know if this will help people who are listening to this, but what actually was the solution? Because you and I worked on it together. That was...
Yeah, well, no, we talked about walking on the ground, but which is definitely helping and a thing that I'm trying. But equally, my ego, if I'm being really honest, tells me, well, I don't know if this is going to help. I don't know if we're going to be able to make this work. And what if it doesn't help? And then, I haven't fixed it. And same thing.
And what I hear in that is that it isn't, it's in those moments, it's often having something that to start working on instead of just the thing in the end. Like the I've got a hack on my own. It's like, how do I get to there? That having like a process. And that's what I think you were saying earlier, Nicky, like making sure that you have the right help that will enable the work that you guys are doing to actually then come into fruition. Because it's like, okay, I know that is the goal is to go to do the hacking, but how can I help in that moment where I go, I need to fix this? How do I fix it? I guess I think that's maybe what I was trying to get at in a very convoluted way.
I think you're right. I think the other thing, especially if you're like us and we're very perfectionist, very driven, we like to achieve, and I think many people who listen to this too is acceptance. Just accept, like, you might want to get to whatever, but also just having complete acceptance of like what's being offered on the day, the scenario that you're in. Like, and that actually it's been such a freeing thing. And I actually had a ride on him the other day where, I can't remember, I had a couple of moments before I got on where I thought, I'm not sure today is going to be good because of X and Y. And then I was just like, acceptance. And I felt instantly better because you can't control everything. And why should you?
You can control very little is the truth. Acceptance is so important. And really what we talked about relative to his hacking was, when you talked about how far he'd come in the 2 years, I was using that alongside your schooling experience, because you don't expect him to go from like a gangly 5-year-old to be able to go perfectly balanced around a prelim test, but you are expecting, not you, but your ego in that moment, you are expecting him to go from where he was to how you want him to be. And so it's really in recognizing, no, this is just where we are right now. And then we move in stages, but being able to manage your own ego with acceptance of where we are right now doesn't mean that's where you're going to be in 3, 6, 9, 12 months time, but it's the rush to get to the end that's going to be the undoing. And you will know this, and Miri, I'm sure you say this, if you behave like you've got all the time in the world with a horse, it will take 5 minutes. If you behave like you've got 5 minutes, it will take all the time in the world. And that energetically is just so important with ourselves as much as with our horses.
Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yeah. And we can also apply that in our own lives. We slow down to be able to achieve the things that we want to achieve, because we're great at doing it with our horses, but not always so good at doing it with ourselves.
Miri's feeling personally attacked.
Majorly. I said this to Rhi the other day. I don't know if I said it on the podcast, but my partner calls it.
Yes, you did.
Don't Miriam it, because my tendency, we were like having some fish for dinner and I was trying to remove the skin from the fish in the pan because we don't like the skin, and I started doing it too fast, and he just put his hand on my arm and he was like, don't Miriam it, we've got time, because I was just going to do it fast. And all my life I've rushed. And I think I remember saying this, I literally didn't used to notice the seasons.
I saw your story on that the other day. So powerful.
Because I just went so fast. I didn't even notice that the leaves were changing colour in the most beautiful way. And it's at moments when I start losing track of what's actually happening around me. I've got to be like, where's the handbrake? Because I've got to do something. I'm going to take a moment to thank one of the sponsors of this podcast, Pet and Pony, a brilliant family-run pet and equestrian shop based in Durham. And even if you're not local, their online store means we can all enjoy their great range of horse and pet gear from anywhere in the UK. What I really love about Pet and Pony is that they keep that small business personal feel. You can tell they actually care about what they stock. Everything on their site is chosen for quality and practicality, not just whatever's trending. One of the brands they do so well is Weatherbeater, especially the ComfyTech rug range. These rugs are built to last. They are made with strong, waterproof and breathable outers from 1200 all the way up to 1800 denier, and a smooth lining that helps stop rubbing. They come in a few different styles and weights depending on your horse's needs, from the everyday essentials to the really technical options for turnout protection. And I can honestly say I'm only now replacing some of our old weather beater rugs. They've lasted a good 6 years. They've been through mud, rain and endless British winters, and they've really held up. Pet and Pony have kindly given our listeners a little thank you as well. If you use the code TEL10 at checkout, you'll get 10% off your order. So if you're sorting out rugs before the weather really turns or just want to support a brilliant UK family business, head to petandpony.co.uk. That's TEL10 for 10% off. Happy shopping. And yeah, it's hard, and I'm feeling quite emotional over and over again because I feel like I no doubt this will resonate with a lot of people, but like I think we slightly touched on this before we started recording, but like horse life, whether it's in a hobbyist way like you, Rhi, or in a professional way like myself, it is 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day, and it's hard. And like making it work, whether that is with your own one horse or the 20 that I am in care of, the scale is just different. You know, the volume of it is different, but the value of it is the same. You know, it is like it's a really hard thing. And I think horses are this magical confronter where we get so much joy from their relationship, but also there is a huge amount of weight to that relationship. And I was wondering, Nicky, if you could, well, maybe offer some gentle advice for people who may be resonating with what I've just said about like the weight of having horses, and how maybe some things that we can do that can help us feel, maybe ease it a little bit.
I'm going to caveat there by saying you might not like what I'm going to tell you because it's hard, right? We're talking about balance here. And the most important thing is to start to slow down. Because even though your mind will be shrieking, I don't have time to slow down, it's one of those things that, as you know very well, your body is your tool. You cannot afford to pass out in the feed room because you're exhausted. So you have to look after your tool. Like presumably you get your rugs cleaned and reproofed, and the same with you clean your tack. I'm not saying you don't shower, but you get my point. You've got to look after stuff for it to have longevity, and the same is true with us. And for women, and I'm sure it's similar for men in the industry too, but it tends to be women that I tend to work with, we put ourselves last. We would never expect our horses to perform if we treated them the way we treat ourselves at times. And actually, I'm saying we, but I'm a lot better at this now. I really am. Like, what do I need? Oh, I need to rest. I need to take the pressure off myself. Because here's the really big news flash. We are putting the pressure on ourselves. And the really good news means that we get to take the pressure off. And if it doesn't feel safe to, which I suspect is what you're experiencing, that's back to there's stuff on top of the fire that's not been processed, the fire within your chest that we talked about a short while ago. So the thing about I was always in a rush and I never noticed the seasons changing, that tells me that your nervous system has been dysregulated most of your life. Mine was too, until about 3 years ago. And when you regulate your nervous system and you start to cultivate a good relationship with yourself, man, life feels so much better and so much easier. And I can see that resonating because even though you're a little bit blurry, I can see the water behind your eyes. And it's a lot, right? And how old are you, Miri?
33.
Yeah. So this is the perfect time, because if you spend the next 10 years like you've spent the last 10 and the 10 before that, you will end up in burnout. And I know that you've had experience of it already. And the older we get, and 33 is still really young, the older we get, the harder it is on our body. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation now, because this gets to change so much for you. Those horses need you, but they need you in a state that works for you and for them. Currently tipping Miri over the edge here.
This is the horrible thing about recording remotely, because we can't give each other hugs.
It's okay.
It's okay. No, I've done a lot of this work, and I hit burnout 2 years ago, January 2 years ago. I just stood up one afternoon in my house and I asked myself, a fairly normal but relatively confronting question. And my life just crumbled underneath me. And I haven't been the same since. And I think for like 10 years since I became self-employed, probably since when I started working with horses when I was 15, and I worked for all sorts of random people that did all sorts of not good things with horses. I built this kind of life that has enabled a huge amount, but also has forced an enormous weight on my shoulders. I haven't not had animal responsibilities since I was 12 years old.
It's a lot.
And then I have more and more and more and more and more. And you said about like it can feel really scary, or I think you said something. What
Unsafe.
triggered it? Yeah, unsafe. And it's, for me, big thing. Like, I've had 1 week of holiday this year, and I've had a couple of days here and there, and this, that, and the other, but not. And I even said to myself, this year I'm going to take 28 days holiday, like all of my staff. They all
You
get
better get off then, because that's the rest of the year.
right. Not even a single day is planned. It's taken me 10 years to not work weekends. And I'm not trying to say woe is me and pity me and God, because I've created a literal very cool thing, and it is. I'm not negating that. But when you talk about that and you say like you've got to slow down, like, I kind of feel like I am, and I'm still not. And I'm like, how slow have I actually got to go?
But it's interesting because I had a session with a client yesterday, and we were talking about slowing down for her. And we don't go from like 100 miles an hour to 5 miles an hour. We do things that are manageable, because it's also got to work within the business. But here's the big thing. The way that the mind works, and you were saying before, I feel like I'm trying to kind of give myself therapy through this conversation. This is why having someone else to talk to, and Rhi can attest to this for sure, somebody else giving you a different viewpoint on what your mind is telling you is so valuable, because your mind will be telling you it's all on me, I have to do it. And what having someone else to work with external to that starts to kind of, you can offer up ideas of how things might work, because, and this is where it can be really challenging as women, we want the control because we think that, nobody does it better than us, but we also need the rest. And so we've got to come to a place where, and I don't use the word got to often, but in this case it's true, because you'll notice I'm very particular about the language that I use, because it's either empowering or disempowering. But we've got to get to a place where we can balance our need for rest and the ability to switch off, and to give the horses what they need. And very often what happens is, and this is the case in yards the country over, the world over probably, is the horses are looked after brilliantly and the humans are on their knees, and it is not sustainable.
We've talked about this a number of times now with the conversations that we've been having. Everything is becoming more expensive. Like, wages are going up for staff, and hay is becoming much more expensive. Feed is more expensive. Fuel is more expensive. Rent is more expensive. Electricity, water, everything, inflation. And in horses, it is a common conversation there's a livery yard Facebook group that you have to prove you're a manager or a yard owner to be part of. The conversations on there are really terrifying. People saying, I am so scared to put my prices up, and I work 7 days a week, and I haven't had a holiday in X many years, and I'm not. I am just a vocal person when it comes to the realities of it. These people are just suffering silently, living through, and then giving up, and we're going to run out of livery yards because people are going to go, I'm not doing this anymore because I'm not paid enough, because I haven't been able to put my prices up, because it's a really complicated, interwoven pattern that I have found myself in the middle of, I guess.
Yeah, and you're definitely not alone. And I'm based next door to a livery yard, and she's completely changed her model. She's gone from having 30 liveries with very little turnout to having like a third of that, if that, and now she runs a shaving business. And what is flying? So she goes out and she delivers shavings, and it's like so much less stressful than it is having 30 liveries on there. And that's just one example. And another friend of mine a number of years ago developed a cross-country course on their farm. So it's like, we are at a critical point. I absolutely hear you. And you're not going to solve that problem for the livery yard world because actually that's too huge at this stage. But what we get to do is help you to look at your situation and what works for Miri.
And I think that in doing that, although you say it won't fix it for lots of people, because of our transparency and these conversations that we have on this podcast and on our social media, I do believe, Nicky, that like Rhi and I are quite poignant, I suppose would be a good, important in that way. Like we are okay with getting it wrong and talking about it, and I think that makes for a very powerful message for a lot of people. And I know, we've had messages a lot on this podcast of people saying how validated they feel and how supported they feel and how seen they feel in a good way from some of the conversations that we've had. So I know I've been having a bit of a rough time of it, but if by having a rough time and coming out the other side, which I really hope to do at some point in the not too distant future, maybe we can help a wider group. Great. I'd like to put my oxygen mask on first, please. Thanks very much. I need to lie down. But
Very important.
to help others through that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really interesting because I think we need to get away from, in the horse world, the judgment. So I am going to be careful about how I share this, but I saw something online recently, not in a very public forum, but an eventer who's a very high level eventer is doing some training over in Canada. And over the course of 2 days, somebody had worked out that how much they're charging to go and to train some people on a clinic in Canada equates to 10,000 a day. And they were like, that's obscene. And I was like, I'm sorry, why is that obscene? This person's traveling halfway across the world. Someone's got to ride their horses when they're away. They're leaving their family. In the corporate world, Rhi will nod furiously here, like things get charged at like 10 times that and people don't bat an eyelid. But there's a lot of shame in the horse world, and this does have to change. That it's like, oh yeah, but we all love horses. Right, but not if we're buried under 10 ton of crap and have got the bailiffs at our door. So this is the big difference. And I know you had Alice on here talking about like the economies. I listened to that. It was a really interesting podcast. And this is the thing that I was on livery in Yorkshire many years ago before we moved to France. And my husband, who's horsey by association, came along to a livery yard meeting. And I'm using the words meeting quotes because it was a very loud, very emotive bun fight. And he left going, what on earth just happened? Because the horsey world is like nowhere else. And my response at the time, this was like 16 odd years ago now, was that's just the horse world. It doesn't have to be that way. And we all get to change. So I actually called out the person and said, why is it obscene? They can't, throughout the eventing season, eventers are not in a position to hold 3-day clinics because they're training their horses. If they earn all of their money in the 3 months off season, and this is what they can charge because of the level that they're at, good on them. Who are you to say, I didn't say it quite as provocatively as that, but who is anyone to say if people will pay for that's wrong? And that's the bit where I think we do get to challenge, because I have an understanding that Tiffany's sells a silver paperclip for like £300. I don't want a paperclip for £300. I've got way better things to spend my money on, but clearly they sell them because people are buying them. So it's just different levels of experience. And I think that by recognising the stories that we're telling ourselves of, we can't put our prices up because what's the impact of that? What would happen if I did put my prices up? Would the right people stay? All of these quite challenging conversations we get to have. That's how we're going to change stuff.
Well, this feels like a lovely moment to spin it round for the hobby rider. Woohoo! And I think shame is at the core of a lot of this, but I wondered if we could touch on a couple of common fears or worries for people.
You may have remembered that we spoke about Frank the mule and Atlas the Shire horse, who is a retired police horse, who are now living out their days in peace with the Horse Trust. With that small donation that you make, you can make sure that their herd, including gentle giants like Atlas the retired police shire and Frank the rescue mule, stay warm and well fed. We also have older residents like the lovely William, Duke of Dazzleton, as he is known in his former years, who is nearing his seas, and whilst still soldiering on, his dentition problems, meaning his weight drops off severely in the winter. Each horse has their own unique needs, so making sure that we support the Horse Trust is really important to help them do that amazing work that they're doing.
We touched a little bit on hacking. Jumping height, I think, is a really interesting one, Nicky. And I know it's different for everybody and everyone will have their own triggers. But could you talk a little bit about some of the common things that get wrapped around people being scared of jumping height, because I also have a thing about 3 foot in my head. I know I do from childhood, which is why I call it 3 foot and not 90 centimeters.
I'm glad you're terrified. I was like, 3 foot? What's that?
Yeah, what? That's
Yep,
like,
top of
that's
the
the top of the
blocks.
blocks.
Yeah. 90s babies. So anyway, back to my actual question to be helpful. Yeah, what are some of the things that come up for people around jumping height?
So it's interesting because generally, actually, people are telling themselves that it's only valid if they're jumping a certain height, i.e., I can't do 80 centimeters because it's only 80 centimeters. Right, or they win a class, but it was only unaffiliated. So that's the whole thing of the mind moving the goalposts again. So people get up in their head about height because they've told themselves a story about the height, exactly as you've just said there. Really important thing to know. I told you about my journey with Donkey many moons ago. And my coach used to say to me so many times, we used to say she should get it on a window sticker. It's not about the height. It's about the rhythm. It's about how in your hand your horse is, whether they're between your hand and your leg. And really importantly, the horse doesn't go into the ring and go, oh, yes, this is 110. Look, we're at 115. It doesn't. Oh, go on.
Well, people often say, don't they? I have this one I hear a lot. My horse doesn't respect small fences.
Yeah.
I think for sure there is a thing about my lovely mare Kiki, who you pointed out in the background. Anything below like 95, and she's a bit like, this isn't really worth my effort. And she definitely jumps bigger fences better. But I think it's really that people get hung up on the height because the height's a psychological level for them. So my psychological level was a metre. So the fact that I went and jumped a metre 15 was a bit stretchy for me. The oxes in the warm-up I really didn't like. But it completely depends on the horse that you're sat on. So if you've got a horse that's bottomed out at a metre, going and jumping 95 will feel stretchy. But if you're on a 130 horse, then going out and jumping 120 is neither here nor there. So but the thing is, it's about what people make the height mean. And actually, you can jump badly around like a 90 centimetre track if you're riding with the handbrake on, and 90 centimetres can feel great if you've got the right level of impulsion and energy and all the rest of it. But I think the bigger issue actually is people get worried about being watched by other people. And I was on a client call just this morning, and she actually said, as really common as you'd expect a lot of people would say to me, oh, I just don't like people watching me. So when I said to her, why is that? And the answer is nearly always the same. Oh, because I think that they'll be judging me. This is a little bit of an awareness piece for you guys, and for everybody else, that's not what they're worried about. Deep down, they're judging themselves and they're projecting that onto other people. So they believe that they're not good enough, so they project that so-and-so thinks that they might not be good enough. So that's just, again, an aware, truth bomb.
That's me doing a mic drop. Yeah.
Because it is. That's the big thing. So many people, oh, I'm really worried what other people are going to think. No, you're judging the what out of yourself. And then that's back to awareness. So where does that judgment come from? What am I scared of? That's the ultimate question. And when you start to ask yourself those questions, but from a place of, with a metaphorical arm around yourself, not like tying yourself up in the corner and pointing your finger, you're doing it from a place of support and compassion, not judgment and beration. It's a very different conversation.
And I was going to ask about competition nerves, but I actually think it's wrapped up in a similar thing. I was thinking about what Miri said about the fall she had off her horse. And I think most people listening to this can think of a thing, a behaviour or a time where the horse's behaviour has frightened them or something has happened and they've had a fall. How do you, with clients, if you can answer this, unpick their own stories, their ego, their experiences and their beliefs with an animal which is kind of its own beast and does its own things? And how do you unpack those two things? Like, when is it the animal's behaviour that's actually frightening or whatever, dysregulated, and when is it someone's beliefs in their own approach? Is that a good question?
So there's quite a few things in there, because first and foremost, if you've got a horse that's rearing, there's something that's causing that behaviour. So there'd be like all levels of like exploration with the horse first and foremost, because Rhi, for sure, I do not believe in naughty horses. They're trying to tell us something. But if there's like a sort of situation that's happened where somebody's had a fall because they've had a stop in the ring or something, the really big thing is to help the person in the first instance to see that was just one incident. Like, how many rounds have you jumped and how many times has that happened? Because as you know, you know yourselves, if you've got big followings on social media, which you have, you can have 10,000 positive comments, but there's be one person that says something negative, and that's the one that you'll focus on. So just notice that your mind is doing that and making that huge. As you know, Rhi, I have techniques that I use with people to dial down something so that that's exactly what we did with you with relation to that hacking situation. Then you were like, oh, actually, it wasn't so bad after all. You can manage your own energy as an individual, but everyone is different. So everybody's capacity, back to what we talked about before, and this can come back to experience. If you've got a horse that's threatening to rear, that would be less of a bother for Miri, who's used to dealing with horses that have got challenges, than it probably would be for you or I, for example, by virtue of the fact that she rides lots of different horses. If it's your own horse and it's obviously a behaviour that's kind of just started to happen, then I would 100% go down the exploratory route to see what was going on. First and foremost, and I say this to a lot of clients, if you don't want to fall off, don't get on. Like, if falling off a horse is a big fear, fundamentally, if that's the route, maybe you're in the wrong sport. You can get past like a bad experience, and I help people to do that all the time. But if ultimately your worry is getting on, I'm going to get hurt, being safe is your driver, then this is a sport that comes with risk. There's obviously risks throughout life generally. But I think the thing is, it's about managing your own energy, because our horses are our mirrors. So if we approach a horse with a whole load of baggage of, I've had a really rubbish day and I'm really worried that my horse is going to do this and that, then your horse is going to feel that. What I teach a lot of clients to do is leave their baggage at the gate, at the yard gate, so they can turn up in a very neutral way with their horse, and to approach every ride as a new ride, because that's what it is. I give an example to a lot of clients. If you've been in a relationship and you've had somebody cheat on you, and then you go into a new relationship, it's understandable that you might be a little bit suspicious, but that's not fair on the person that's the new partner, because they've done nothing wrong. Horses are just being horses. They've done something one day, if it's just out of the ordinary, give them the grace to turn up and expect them to be neutral. Otherwise, if you expect them to be difficult, naughty, whatever language people want to use, you're much more likely to create that in your energy in the way in which you're reacting to them. Does that make sense?
Do you think you said something there that I really try and avoid saying, interestingly, to people? You said about leaving baggage at the gate. Do you think it's about leaving it, or do you think or is it more about processing it so that it's not carried?
So in my work, it's 100% about processing it. But so that's what I mean, emotional baggage when I say processing it. But everybody has baggage from the day. So like if you've had a difficult meeting with a client, it's very hard to just kind of go, oh, I'm just going to process that and then get on with it, because processing takes time and tools. But you can put it in your backpack, hang it over the gate of the yard, and then go and do your horse. So you kind of then go, leave it in the boot of your car.
That's interesting. I have a practice that I encourage people to do, like an awareness exercise, like a breathing awareness exercise, basically. And I had a very interesting session with a client recently, and she's got a young horse, and she's a middle-aged lady, and she's backing this young horse, and she's in Austria. So I'm helping her online, and she was coming to the block. And she taught her horse to present to the mounting block, and everything was all going really well. But she was like, there was just something jarring. And I could see that there was just, obviously I'm like this on a computer screen. So the amount of depth that I can feel is pretty good, but it's not as good as it could be if I was there. And I said to her, just pause for a second. How do you feel? And she said, oh, well, da, da, da. And, she listed off quite a few different things. And I said, okay, we're just going to stop for a minute. We did a breathing exercise, and the difference in this situation. So that's what you mean by leaving it, by just letting it go, almost by saying, right, I can't fix that right now. That happened. I'm just going to move energetically in a different way. That's okay. I understand a bit. You're nodding at me, so similar.
Yeah. So what I say to people in that situation is, if you drive to the yard, before you open your car door, check in with yourself. How am I doing? How much of my day is still present? And then, exactly as you say, just do some breathing exercises. And it doesn't need to take more than a couple of minutes. And then just leave whatever is there. And actually, very often, they don't need to kind of metaphorically pick it back up, because actually, by being with their horse and doing something different, they've got some perspective about whatever it was that was driving them insane before.
I love that.
But that's just stuff from the day, whereas obviously the stuff that I'm talking about that's much deeper is emotional processing of like life events and things.
Yeah, there'd be a big pile of shit outside my gates if I did that every day.
I think it's also okay to be like, I'm finding it hard to empty my backpack right now. Like, there have been times when I've gone to the yard and I've planned to go hacking alone, for example, and I have found it really hard to put my bag down at the gate. And I feel like, okay, I can't put this bag down right now, and that's okay. I'm just going to accept that I can't do that. But I'm also not going to now clamber on top of my horse, put him through what he finds stressful with this bag on my back, and we're just going to do something else. And on that day, I might go in the school. If I don't feel up for schooling, I'll do groundwork. If I don't feel like I can even do that, I'll just groom.
Yeah.
So I think it's also okay to be like,
100.
you know, it's hard to put the bags down sometimes.
It's great that you are capable of letting yourself off the hook like that, Rhi. Because that is what I think some people really struggle with. I say it to people all the time, you know, if the weather is absolutely terrible and you haven't ridden for a couple of days, it's okay not to. Put a
100%.
turnout rug on and go and do some walking in hand over poles. Your horse is going to definitely survive, you know. There are times when I have to put on a pair of waterproof trousers and do my coat up and just get the heck on with it because I'm being paid to. But if there are opportunities where I don't have to do that, I won't. Like with my own horses, I'm not gonna just push myself through that. And I think it's great that you have that mentality, because that will keep that cup of confidence with Harley so much stronger than having those wobbly days where you're like, definitely should have done that.
100%. And people that are like, I have to ride because I've told myself I'm going to, there's a balance, because you might have some people that then don't ride for 3 months. So clearly there's a point where you've got to go, hang on a minute, I'm getting myself into a difficult pattern. But if you're questioning whether you want to ride, notwithstanding unless if you've lost your nerve or whatever, but you've had a difficult day and you're saying, do I want to ride? There's no rule that says you have to. Like, you get to give yourself permission just to go and give them a brush and a cuddle. They don't care, and you can do way more damage by pushing yourself to do something either to you or to them than it will ever do just, you know, hanging around having a cup of tea and a chat and a cuddle and just like, you know, just being with them.
Well, Nicky, much as I'd love to hold you captive for the next 4 hours, and I think Miri would probably feel very similar.
Maybe
I think we ought
off
to sort
recording.
of- Yes, yes. 3 hours later, we're still here. I would love to kind of, hopefully this has been really interesting for people and they have felt seen and heard. How can people work with you if they would like to start exploring this?
So I've kind of got 2 ways in which I work with people. So I've got an online course which is called Supercharge Your Riding, and it's about an hour and a half's worth of content in, you probably know the number of modules, I can't remember, but maybe 9, 10 modules, something like that.
Yes, yeah.
And it really breaks down mindset work for riders. So it kind of brings things into your awareness of like the things that happen that are common with riders. We talk about confidence, we talk about if you're stepping up a level, we talk about pitfalls, we talk a little bit about the science of the mind. So it gives you a really good grounding. And I created that because honestly, people need to have that level of understanding before they'll be ready to do anything on a one-to-one basis with me. And then I do some one-to-one coaching with people. So I have a kind of like entry level 1 hour coaching session that people can contact me if that's what they're interested in. Those slots go super fast. So if you're serious, then drop me a message. And then I have kind of other bigger, in quotes, coaching options. So I have like a 4-month coaching program, which is called the Empowered Woman. And that's a very structured program that people go through. So they have fortnightly coaching sessions with me. There's pre-recorded modules, there's exercises, there's lots of tools and like audios, visualization, do a lot of nervous system regulation inside that program as well. So there's kind of different ways, but I think the Supercharge Your Riding masterclass is the starting point, and it's just £35, so it's like very accessible price point for people to kind of, and you get access for a year. And there is actually a guided visualization in there that people can use to kind of start to program their mind for success as well. So and you can find that on my website, which is beyourbestYet.co.uk, and that will be on the /equestrian tab.
And I'd just like to, I mean, I work with Nicky, so obviously I think she's great, but I just want to say, before I started working with Nicky, you said you looked at my page and you were like, oh, she doesn't need my help. And then Nicky saw a story of mine. I had a horrible lesson with a new coach. I think I talked about it actually. And I just like was so frightened and I didn't feel good and I felt like I'd let Harley down, and I got in the back of the lorry. I didn't even want to canter like in a circle and stuff, and I felt like she pushed me in the wrong way and I just felt awful. And I got my camera out because I was really upset and I wanted to show people that was okay. And I think I said like, I just feel like I'm doing a terrible job. I have my head in my hands and I was really upset. And last Sunday, I went and did my first ever hunter trial with my horse, which I've never done in my whole life. And the confidence that I felt, particularly on the middle of that course where I decided that I was going to actually sit up and ride instead of letting my brain catch up and be like, we're actually going around a cross-country course. Like, I felt so proud of doing that. And my friend messaged me and was like, this is the girl who was afraid to canter in a circle at home. And you just think, it's really been transformative and in lots of ways. My riding, yes, but also in lots of other areas of my life. So if this resonates, then I really would recommend reaching out to Nicky, because it's been great.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind.
Nicky, I have a closing tradition on this podcast. And before you go and ride your lovely horse, I ask the same question to every person, and I am really interested to hear your answer. If you had one thing that you could say to every equestrian and they had to listen, what would you say?
We do this because it's meant to be fun. If it's not fun, it's probably because of something that's happening between your ears. And you might feel like it's not possible to change it, but I promise you that it is possible. And not only will you feel so much better, but your horse will thank you for it.
Yep.
Thank you, Nicky. That'll do it. Jesus Christ. I think this is a record for a number of cries on a podcast. Goodness me. Thanks, Nicky.
You're so welcome.
Thank you for joining us.
Loved it.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And thanks for listening to me cry a lot. I appreciate the group therapy. Goodbye for now.